Good afternoon, everyone. I hope everyone had a nice lunch break. Welcome, Excellencies, distinguished guests. My name is Claire Davan. I am a specialist of public sector and climate change governance specialist for international organizations. I will be moderating this session today. We'll be talking about the clean energy shift or cleaner energy shift. Today we have a very diverse group of high-level speakers focused on the energy transition. We'll be diving into the topic in particular of green hydrogen and the circular economy. So first I'll be briefly introducing our speakers and sharing some facts for introduction before we get to the questions. I think we have about an hour and 30 minutes, so I will be asking one question per speaker. And I will invite you, the speakers, to reflect on what other co-panelists have said during the discussion before we turn to questions from the audience. So the brief introduction of our speaker. We have His Excellency Dr. Csaba Gondola, State Secretary for Circular Economy and Climate Policy coming from the country of Hungary. We also have Mr. Thierry Leperc, who's the founder of Soldavent and president of Ideal. We have Mr. Lawrence Jones joining us from Edison as a senior VP of international programs from the US. We also have Mrs. Najla Yazgi, managing director of Siemens Energy and Gamesa Renewable from Morocco. We have Mr. Amir Sharifi, who is Chief Investment Officer of Hy24, so coming from the hydrogen finance sector. We have Mr. Shahid Jarmouni, not yet with us, but potentially with us later on, we'll see. We have Mr. Ali Zewali, Chief Development Officer from HIF Global. And I think that's all for our speaker today. Before I dive into the questions, I just wanted to share some background information also for our audience.
Can we ask the audience to sit on the table so that we can...
Yeah, sure. Please feel free to join everyone at the table. This is meant to be a lively conversation. So as much as we have good point, no, it's a great, it's a very welcoming gesture. So please join us at the table. It'll make it plus convivial. Okay, so just for the purpose of sharing some facts and data about the topic, we are going to be diving into clean energy, renewables, cleaner energy, and in particular, green hydrogen. So just to share, a study in the journal Nature estimated that solar and wind resources alone could support the production of over 100 times the current global energy demand. And often what is portrayed as a missing piece, green hydrogen could be perceived by many as the missing piece for three things that I'm going to be detailing. So missing piece for decarbonization of different sectors and industries, those that are in particular difficult to electrify directly. And so we're talking about examples of refineries or fertilizer plants. It can also be perceived as the missing piece for the long-haul transport, as fuel for shipping and aviation, for instance. And then finally, it can also be perceived as the missing piece for long-term energy storage for excess solar wind energy, helping to balance grids. So that's a broad overview of what green energy, green hydrogen can be. And we'll be exploring this with our speaker on this panel. So my first question to His Excellency, Mr. Gondola, how do you, from your perspective as a representative of your country, how do you balance working with other countries like Morocco or others on green energy while also trying to build a more self-reliant and resilient national economy? Thank you.
Thank you very much. First of all, it is my great pleasure to be here. Thank you very much for inviting to this prestigious conference. It's a fantastic venue, and I hope I can contribute to the discussion. It's, as you mentioned, it's an absolutely timely and important question when we talk about two mega trends that are shaping our future and our present days are digitalization and the green transformation. And these two megatrends are having a profound impact on our daily life. And we still don't know what's going to happen in the next couple of years, but I would say that in 10 or 20 years, we're going to look this period as something resembles to the Industrial Revolution. The whole world will be absolutely different in 20 years. The paradox of this megatrends, two parallel megatrends, are that these are energy extensive and raw material extensive megatrends. So we need to find a balance how we can manage these trends while trying to save the planet. We just concluded or finished the COP a week ago, and I'm sure that most of you are familiar with the outcomes. There were great discussion or what's the future, what we need to follow, and there were basically three frictions: the developing countries, the fossil fuel countries, and the more ambitious countries. And you all know this perspective and all these arguments that were made. But what is clear, that green transition needs to happen. It needs to be a well-ordered transition that requires infrastructure, monetary resources. It requires good governance. It requires private equity and private involvement as well, and social transformation. And tools to this type of transformation is absolutely green technologies. But as it was mentioned already, that there are missing puzzles in this green transition yet. As you asked the Hungarian perspective, we last year we produced 25% of electricity out of solar panels, making us Hungary a landlocked small country, top one globally in terms of solar productivity, which is a very, very nice and ambitious number. And we are expecting Hungary to be in the top 3 or 5 in the next couple of years in that sense as well. But we also see the backdraws of this huge and very fast development, that renewables are not just renewables, but daytime dependent, weather dependent, and seasonal dependent technologies that gives a great stress on the infrastructure we do have, and the one hand, and then the other hand, they produce when they want to produce electricity and not when we want to use the electricity. So there are missing puzzles in that sense, and wind is basically similar with the better ratio or better numbers, but still not the holy grail of green transition. And that's what we experience in Hungary as well, building up a lot of renewables, but still the whole picture does not come together yet. I think we might gonna talk about nuclear as well as something that is a carbon-free producer. That's one sort of alternative, but because of that different debate, I wouldn't go into details in nuclear. But the other element that is missing could be the green hydrogen. That's the main topic of our discussion today. And it's, of course, emerging solution to complete the whole electricity production and substituting natural gas in Hungary as well. And I look to hydrogen, especially green hydrogen, as not as primary energy source, but rather as a carrier of energy. Technologies exist. A lot of different technologies already exist, so there is nothing new that needs to be invented, but a lot of research and development needs to be put in that sector to enhance efficiency, to try to overcome with the shortages of some sort of metals that is required. Of course, water is needed for that type of technology. There is a lot of cheap energy that is required. So I would say that hydrogen, especially green hydrogen, could be the solution, could be the future. I see green hydrogen as solar was 15 years ago. Expenses were like really high and went down exponentially, and now there is a flat ratio with the solar panels. It's compared to prices of 15 years, it's extremely cheap. That's what made possible in Hungary as well to basically overbuild these type of energy generation power plants. But still, we are not yet there, I would say, and experts having a better knowledge than I do in terms of financing green hydrogen. But what we see that there is a cost gap still exists in that technology. We hear 6 to 8 euros per kilogram prices, and experts say that the flipping point is somewhere around 3 or 4, maybe 3 euros. So there is still a gap that needs to be bridged in order to and we are not talking yet about the infrastructure costs. We are not talking about ports, ships, pipelines, new trade routes, and new safety measures that needs to be implemented. So there is a lot ahead of us in terms of using hydrogen at the scale we would like to use it. And I believe Morocco is a pioneer in that sense, could give us a lot of good examples. Even us Hungarians, we are landlocked countries with limited resources. But still, there is a great potential, and we are looking to the examples that Morocco is trying to pursue that could help us to formulate our strategies in Hungary as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We'll have time to reflect on the insight that you shared about Hungary and Morocco. I'm going to turn to Monsieur Thierry Leperc, who's the founder of Soldavent and president of Ideal. Just as a background also for the audience, when we talk about gray hydrogen today, it's about roughly 96% of the production. And the question is, are we turning this ecosystem into an industrial ecosystem that is green, or are we creating from scratch a whole new industrial ecosystem? Thank you.
We're in trouble. The energy transition is in trouble. We had a climate conference with one key country missing. We have companies around the world saying the time has come to stop this green nonsense. We have new governments being elected and who are promising to put an end to this. And if we look at hydrogen specifically, in 2022, the European Commission came with the Repower EU strategy and said we're going to go for 20 million tons of hydrogen by 2030, including 10 million tons of imports. Now, the most optimistic scenario is 1.7, but reality should probably be far smaller than that. And the reason why is that the economics are in trouble. I mean, we've worked with Amir and others on the Hydra España project with ArcelorMittal, Fertiberia, couple of years ago, when we came to the point that what you were just saying, there's a gap. There's a gap between what competitiveness gap between what green hydrogen, and that could be the case for other green solutions are more expensive than others. And if you look at industry in Europe, for instance, our industry is saying, if I want to have a higher cost than my competition in China, or I'm going to just go away. And this is what is happening right now for Europe industry. It's suffering immensely from higher prices, and lots of chemical companies and steel plants are closing, and it's all moving elsewhere. So, is it all gone? No. And just a word on Morocco. Morocco has been, to be very frank, a bit a late comer into this thing, but a massive pioneer, a massive, with the announcement which was made by the Offre Maroc. Now we have 6 consortiums which have been selected. You have, if you look at the potential for all those projects, it runs in the tens of millions of hydrogen. So you'd say Morocco is extremely well positioned. I won't go into all the resource stories saying, the solar, wind, space story, availability for even water with desalination, proximity of Europe for Europe is great for Morocco. But if you look at what has happened over the last 12 months, it's not much. And one of the reasons is that the business models and the subsidy-based business models that we were counting on in Europe are not materializing. And one specific reason is that if you're adding cost to a poor European competitiveness level, it's not going to go much further. Now, the sun is coming from the east. And I don't want to focus everything on China, but there is right now a major battle which is shaping up. And that battle is, you could say it's Europe, it's US versus China. But there's another word for it. It's petrostate against electrostate. And I would like to frame it first in terms of geopolitics, because that's what we're seeing today. And geography is destiny. I won't spend too much time. We have a speaker from the US who will take the US word for it, but US is oil and gas country and will remain so for one very simple reason, is that its resources, oil and gas resources, just like that of Russia or Saudi Arabia, is so massive that it's stuck by it. Here in North Africa, you could say Algeria in that situation. Morocco, on the other side, doesn't have oil and gas. And you know what? That's a good thing. The same thing for China. China produces some oil, but today is banking massively on this electrostate strategy, which means solar, wind, batteries, electric vehicles, electrification. But ultimately, this doesn't work purely with electrons, and you need molecules. And those molecules, there's no alternative to hydrogen molecules. And right now, what we're seeing is those the largest project in the world for hydrogen was commissioned by Envision just a couple of months ago in Mongolia for 500,000 tons. And it's actually producing. It's not a project, it's actually producing, hoping to ship some of that project, hydrogen to the world. And what is interesting is that if you see that as a total paradigm based on competitiveness, and that's what the Chinese industry is telling us, you don't need to expect higher expensive costs like we've done in Europe with subsidies and everything. If you go with scaling, with the proper right of proper financing, if you take it say the Chinese way, it can be cheaper than fossil fuels. And this is what is happening. The electrostate strategy is not a fancy luxury greenish strategy. It is a ruthlessly efficient strategy meant to take and to win that. So what we're saying, and if this is a geopolitical conference, I think it's important to frame it. At one point, what we're looking at in the next 10 years, it's a carbon trap where some countries, certainly the US, certainly Russia, certainly others, are going to be stuck in a high carbon environment. And some others, certainly China, and most likely as well, some countries, Europe, which doesn't have oil and gas, or with the exception of, and others. And so what is going to shape is this probably low carbon trading area, which is going to shape and look for something very interesting where hydrogen is not just going to be a greenish thing promoted by wealthy Europeans who wanted to greenify the world. It's going to be pushed by the global south and to engineer industrial development. And this is another thing. I've already spoken too much, but I'd like to say that what is at stake here is not just producing energy, it's industrial development, it's steel making, it's fertilizers, it's fuel and shipping, etc. It's a ton of things that can be developed. So it's not just about greenifying Europe, it's about jump-starting industry here in Africa, and with this global collaboration involving Europe and China.
Thank you so much. This was an amazing segue to Mrs. Najla Yazgi, because we wanted to talk about the localizing of the value chain in Morocco and the role that Morocco plays in this vast value chain.
Thank you very much. Honored to be part of this fruitful panel and discussion, which brings a lot of reflection. It's hard to talk now about how to gear up capacity when we know we already have a lot of problems. And that brings already having such discussions about how can we gear up the capacity and prepare the country or the region for large-scale hydrogen projects where the visibility is not there. So there, the key is how can we prepare our technology? I mean, from our side is we are a technology provider, and the technical solution is not the issue here, because the technical solutions are ready. We already have solutions for renewable energy, wind turbines that are reaching a certain maturity. We have electrolyzers that are in the path of reaching a certain maturity and scaling up in capacity. For instance, we have our gigafactory in Berlin that can produce up to 1 gigawatt of capacity per year. Now the question here is how can we plan this manufacturing and also work together into being prepared for this wave of green hydrogen if it happens at the right places, at the right time, when it makes sense, when it's bankable, and how can we play together to really be ready and also make the best case to make it suitable for the environment it's in and benefits the local population and also create an ecosystem around it. So that's the key area is collaboration. Collaboration in having the strategy set up, in the transfer of knowledge, of mapping out how can you first train the people that will be able to execute such projects when it comes, and also map up the right supply chain in a way to be efficient, not only to say, okay, I want a certain percentage of local content, but to really define together of what makes sense. For instance, when we talk about wind turbines, knowing the large scale of its components, we're talking about blades that can go up to 90 meters. for large-scale projects that we understand it can only be large-scale projects to make the financial feasibility or bankability of such projects to reach a certain level of LCOH, levelized cost of electricity. So to do that, you can only do it by trying to optimize also on the transport. Such large components, they are very expensive transporting them. So some things like that are a really must and will come. Now, the need is to have the visibility and the right and also the commitments from developers, from the lenders, from also the public authorities to work together, and not only everybody's having their own plan and working in silos while the technology provider is scaling up gigafactories, and then in reality nothing is happening, or you're starting to open up factories to manufacture components that would never actually be utilized. So again, the key is to work together. Another also limiting factor that we see is infrastructure. How is this infrastructure going to be built to be ready for such projects? And who would take the risk or the initial investments to set up the first ports to export ammonia, for instance, to set up the roads to be able to transport the large towers and wind turbines to remote areas? But anyhow, we know that Morocco has all the resources and necessary to be one of the leaders. And then if everything is planned right, the high wind resources combined with solars and also the proximity to or being a coastal area is the perfect recipe to be one of the pioneers. Now it's just that public and private sectors need to come together and be rather prepared and find, and with the financing entities and offtakes, really find the right mechanisms that will make such projects viable. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We'll have time to reflect on the elements that you shared after we are through with our first round of questions. So let me turn to Mr. Amir Sharifi from High24, so Hydrogen Finance. Sorry, when we press the button, it switches off others. So my question to you is about the bankability hurdle. So from your perspective as an investor, what is the single most critical element that must be in place for a green hydrogen project to be considered bankable? And in the context of Morocco, but also broader in other countries as well. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you for the question, bankability. I think there are three answers to your question on what is driving bankability. One is offtake, second is offtake, third is offtake. And I think that the issue with the offtake is not the demand. There is actual demand. The fact is that there is a price gap that was described before, so I would not get back on that. To fill the price gap, actually, and to fulfill a conversion of the 100 million tons that are already of existing demand for hydrogen that exists, in fact, what needs to happen is to have kind of demand obligations. This is what's driving today the decisions of investment that have been taken at a global level. Just to give a figure, because there's been a lot of questioning about whether the hydrogen sector is still moving in the context of a decrease of the hype. In fact, there have been 110 billion worth of projects that are post FID today. So that's the figure from the Hydrogen Council and the IEA. So these are confirmed figures and these are factual figures of projects moving forward. The reality is that if you want the projects to become bankable and to go through this FID process, the demand obligation is effectively works for countries where you have this mechanism in place. In Europe, it's the case of the of the refuel of the RED 3 and the Refuel EU Aviation Maritime schemes that kind of create this this traction for a refinery to say I'm going to today using gray hydrogen. It's a switch to green hydrogen, and there is a bit of a premium, but it's going through it's a pass through to the cost of the fuel. So in the end, it's a decision that's okay. And then I'm also saving on the future carbon cost. So it's a no regret decision. So we're seeing a lot of decisions being made on the refinery space today, and they're the major drivers of the demand. The other one is a bit linked to the green vectors and the green transformation of the industry. So ammonia is going to be one of them. And we have one big project in Sweden that is being built for green steel, which is also working on the premises of the carbon border adjustment mechanism, where in fact, given the availability of very cheap hydropower locked power, you have the possibility to build a green steel plant and to sell the green steel to Volkswagen and other car manufacturers at a price that is very close to the normal price, the conventional price, and in the end have an offtake that then leads the project to happen. So that's, I think, regulatory demand is effectively the start of the industry, and that's driving most of the projects that are happening in Europe. And at High 24, we have an investment portfolio. We have been deploying roughly. We have raised 2 billion 4 years ago. We have committed 1 billion out of the 2 billion. And out of that, 400 million are actually spent into projects. So part of it is in Sweden and in Spain and other projects which are actually post-FID. 80% of that money is going to is post-FID stage. And so that's the demonstration that these projects are actually going forward, and we can see it from our window. But for countries which don't benefit or don't want to subsidize their industry, what's the game? To make the projects, in this case, the case for Morocco is the case for even China is not really subsidizing directly. They have indirect subsidies, but they're not really subsidizing directly, or even a petro-state like Saudi Arabia. In these cases, I think you have to be fundamentally more competitive. So fundamentally more competitive means that you need to go for scale, because a big driver of the cost inefficiency is the fact that you do something at a lower scale. So the fixed cost of the civil engineering is a big drag to the overall cost of the project. So that's for the capex, and for the opex, obviously, is the cost of power, which is going into the electrolyzer. And that cost of power can be extremely competitive in some regions where you have available renewable capacity, like it's the case for Morocco, of course. But then there's a third one that's a bit underlooked, which is the innovation part or the technology part. And that's also where I think Morocco has a clear angle, because today we're seeing that the alkaline technology has been pushed to a very high level of efficiency by the Chinese, for instance. And so that's like probably the result of the fact that they go for simple technology and making it more efficient based on the simple way of doing the molecule. But in fact, if you take a long-term view, you can look at other technologies that can have a higher efficiency from door to door, and using, like if you take the case of solid oxide, for instance, that you can use the heat from the process into an Haber-Bosch process. Effectively, you can get to an aggregate, maybe not the best LCOH, but maybe in the end, a better LCOA, a levelized cost of ammonia down the road. So the technology aspect is very important. And this means that if you want to capture it, you need to make some investments today into building local industry that's not going to be immediately bankable. You need to take the view that it will become the case in a few years. And if you do it, and if you pioneer that space, probably you build a competitive advantage for the future. So the combination of these three factors can probably in the end overcome what the subsidy is doing for the European projects. And that's why I think there is a big promise for the Global South, because these are places where you have all these ingredients gathered. And this will, I think, be the promise that in the longer term, there will be massive amounts of projects that go at prices, I think that Thierry was mentioning, where effectively you can unlock a lot of further demand.
Thank you very much. Another very interesting segue for the e-fuel topic with Mr. Ali Zerwali. If I'm not, if I'm correct, your organization focuses on e-fuels that work with existing engines and infrastructure. And so my question to you is, you have a lot of projects being developed in different countries. What are the top criteria for selecting projects for e-fuel production, whether in Morocco or other countries? Are there specificities to this country, or are they similar to others? And what are the main levers that are recommended to bring down costs for the green molecules that we talked about, including the UN recommendations? Thank you.
Thank you for your question. So there is an extensive list of criteria to choose a project, but let's focus maybe on the three most important ones for us. So HIF is a developer that is located in US and Chile, Uruguay, Brazil, Australia, and now positioning in Morocco, Oman, Saudi, and India, and also China. So we have a big ambitions because we see a lot of appetite in the market pumping up in e-fuels, and more appetite for e-fuels. And when it comes to choose a project, maybe the three main criteria is first the renewable potential, of course, because you need to have a low cost of electricity, a very competitive LCOE, and I would highlight or focus more on the wind, because there you can have a better capacity factor. If you have hydro, it's the best with a cheap LCOE, but then it's difficult to amortize one project only with hydro, because then you need to go for 50 years or 60 years, and you don't have enough takes for 50 or 60 years. And it was well explained that maybe this is the main challenge. The second, beside the renewable, for me is, in the case of e-fuels, is the CO2. And it depends on the market that you want to address. If you want to address the European market, you need to have a biogenic CO2 or a non-avoidable sources. If you have an ETS or carbon pricing mechanism in the country, it doesn't exist in any country in the world about Europe, except Europe. So this is also a big thing, because it's a very important share in the LCOM for the methanol, but you can go down to ESA for e-gasoline or whatever. And the last one that maybe is also the most impactful is the cost of financing in the country. Because we tend to believe that, but depending on the country risk and on the cost of the financing in the country, it has a huge impact on your LCOF. And this is what brings me to your second question, because the UN just published it on Monday, an official fact sheet detailing 7 levers to break through the green hydrogen market and to become maybe very close in terms of price to the gray, to the bio for sure, and to the gray as of the technology now. So because I used to work from my previous responsibilities in Morocco, I used to work a lot with the UN, so I participated to this kind of study. And it was interesting that tens of experts came to the same takeaways or result, is that today, based on the current technology, we can reduce the cost between 40 to 65%, which is impressive. And then if we try to understand what are the 7 levers that the Secretary General will start to advocate from this week, we see that first you have the regulatory levers, which are 3. So we find there something that is standard and that we have heard a lot, the mandates, the certification. But I think that this new fact sheet is highlighting a lot on the grandfathering to reduce the risk of the projects, because maybe you have a green molecule today, but if the regulation changes in 2 years, it could turn to become gray. But this is not what has the most significant impact. So the second section is one recommendation about the technology. And what the experts are saying, we need to inspire from the oil and gas. We are developing projects in remote areas, most of them. But we are trying to develop them as if we were developing solar or wind in non-remote areas. So we need to go for the modularization, means prefabricating all the modules, be it the electrolyzers, the methanol to jets, the methanol synthesis in factories that are providing cheap cost, and then bringing these modules with, like it's modules 600 tons, 1,000 tons of modules, bringing and you install them, and it lowers the cost significantly of the capex. You could reduce it by 1/3 very easily in terms of capex. And then you have really the big bench of the impact, which the experts call it the project structuring breakthrough. So what they say first, if you move from hourly matching to yearly matching, you increase your production by 45% because in the best areas, you are reaching a capacity factor of 65 to 70%. So based on hourly matching. If you go to yearly matching, you produce 45% more, meaning that your cost, because 95% is capex, is 45% less. Then they said, okay, let's take a conservative assumption, which is 30% with lower cost. You reduce your cost. So you can, it works with ammonia, so it's based on techno-economic models and financial models. It works with ammonia, with green hydrogen, with e-methanol, whatever. And then they said, if I do that, then I'm not anymore RED III compliant, RFNBO compliant, because I don't have the hourly machine. So let's go. And I don't care about the CO2 sources. I don't look for the e-methanol, for example, for a biogenic CO2. Biogenic CO2 costs around $350 to $400 per ton in 1 ton of methanol. And it's very competitive. Then you can move for $400 to something like $50 or $100 if you take it, be it from a chemical facility, be it from a cement facility. So you reduce your cost of CO2 significantly. And anyhow, the tax on the carbon is counted on the first who is emitting that. So this is the first lever. The second one, they said, let's go now to compare with oil and gas. They have depreciation period and tenures of debt like 25, 30 years, even 50 years. If we just move from 12 years, which is the basis of our calculation today, to 25 or 30 years, we can reduce the cost again by at least 30%. And the last one, they said, if I do all of this, so I cannot apply for non-recourse financing, which comes with a higher rate. So I need to go for financing with recourse, and I can also blend it with concessional financing. And then I can have an impact between 12 to 20% on the LCOM. So when you bring all these optimizations, one beside the other, then you can reduce your cost between 40 to 65%. Based on the technology today, but it's not compliant with the European regulation. But then you go to the voluntary market. And if you are close to the gray, ammonia or methanol, having all of that, you start to compete with them. But this cannot be done in all the regions. You need one region that is connected also to the grid with a high potential. So you cannot do it in the south of Chile because you cannot complete with the yearly matching. You cannot do it in countries with high risk because you cannot get access to the kind of financing. So we found that there are some very sweet spots where you can activate all these levers and start to compete in a voluntary market without counting the carbon tax with the gray molecule and for sure with the biomolecule.
Thank you very much for this very in-depth analysis. I'll now turn to Mr. Lawrence Jones, who's coming from the US, from Edison, as a Senior VP for International Programs. And so my question is, we're going to take a step back and a step higher for this conversation that gets sometimes very technical, and let's see how we can put this conversation into perspective with the overall theme of this conference. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Moderator. Good afternoon, everybody. First of all, I would like to ask this audience to wake up. It seems as though the mood in this room is almost dampened, and I'm wondering whether it's because of some of the remarks you've heard about the depth of hydrogen. If you listen to my friend from France, his remarks were not too pessimistic, but definitely not too optimistic. So I look in the audience and I ask you to wake up, because this is supposed to be an exciting conversation. And I said that because hydrogen is about the future. I think the conversation, oftentimes when we have new technology, there are a couple of things we're struggling with. The first thing is we're struggling with this sense of urgency. We want it now. We want hydrogen to be now what renewable is, but renewable is today what hydrogen, or hydrogen is today what renewable was 20 years ago. If 20 years ago, if you had this conversation about renewables, you would have heard some of the same things about, cost. You would have heard some opposition. You would have heard some concerns about, petrostate, electrostate. And I think the challenge that we have right now is that there's a realism behind hydrogen and any other source that's new technology, dealing with how quickly can it be realized. And sometimes the early adapters, some of the folks around this panel who have stepped their foot into the water already, may become the victims, because early adoption always means you're taking a risk. And it doesn't mean that hydrogen is not going to work 25 years from now. It may be very cost effective 25 years from now. But I think there's a reality in terms of now, and I want to focus on the word now. The theme of this conference, reinventing the global equation. And the question then is, how does hydrogen play in the global equation? What does that mean, the global equation? And the factors affecting that equation, some of them we've already talked about. We've talked about issues around supply chain. We've talked about affordability. Cost is a big issue. But then there's also the factor of what I call pragmatism, in the sense that, yes, there was a discussion regarding what happened at COP in Brazil. And it's true that some governments are sort of scaling back. Some companies are also scaling back. Will that be the same situation 5 years from now or 10 years from now? Maybe not. Because as you know, energy policy in many parts of the world is like a pendulum. It swings from one side to the other side. And the question is, why I say pragmatism is important is we have to find a way to, I will say, walk and chew gum at the same time. We want change. We want to accelerate the energy transition. We want to accelerate the use of new technology. But we have to balance that with the reality that the average person on the street wants reliability, wants affordability. They want it now. And so if you're bringing a new technology that is more expensive than the current technology, obviously there will be some opposition. But that opposition shouldn't be seen as the death of the new technology. It just means that the cost curve hasn't gone down. Remember, 30 years ago, when we had conversations about solar energy, people just thought it was never going to be cost competitive. Look at the cost curve today. Solar has gone down. Energy storage, if you look back 10 years ago, people just didn't think lithium ion was going to be competitive. Today, the cost has gone down. So I think the balance here of wanting it to happen quickly, which is one of the things I hear when I talk to investors in hydrogen today. They want it now. They want, policies and other things, which I agree with. But in the reality, if I'm a policymaker, my first commitment is to the citizens of my country. And what do citizens want? So if I went around this room and asked the question, how many people here would prefer to pay more for clean hydrogen and less for non-clean hydrogen? You will see that more people want it as cheap. Because the problem is we have set the expectation that these new technologies are supposed to be cheaper than the old technology. In fact, I've always been against those who would say, they would use the argument that renewable is cheaper today compared to other things. Well, you can never win the argument of something being cheaper if you're the new guy on the block, because you have to then prove your point that the old guy is actually more expensive than the new guy. And so the conversation around, you asked a question regarding where the U.S. is. I won't speak for the U.S. administration, but I can only say that you are right that the U.S. does have a huge amount of oil and gas. In fact, today is one of the largest producers of oil in the world, right? The same vein, Morocco is one of the leading when it comes to renewables in Africa. Botswana has one of the best solar resource in Africa. Does it mean Botswana is going to go to using hydrogen today or tomorrow if the economics doesn't add up? I don't know, right? So I think I hear the conversation, but I think reality must always be, are the customers ready to pay for this new technology? If the answer is yes, how do we make it affordable? Now, do we need government intervention? I think the gentleman was saying, Mr. Sharif, maybe we do. But who makes up the government? The same people. We saw what happened in Europe when the war in Ukraine started and we had the aggression from Russia. What happened? The European Union reversed some of its policies. Germany reversed some of its policies because for them, what was important was affordability, energy security. And if hydrogen is going to guarantee energy security, energy affordability, it would be used by government, by citizens around the world. So I don't know whether or not the nail is in the coffin for hydrogen for the next year or two. Maybe it will take another 5 years. Maybe we come back here in the year 2050 and everyone is going to be talking about fusion, because by that time hydrogen will be so cheap, we'll now be discussing fusion energy or some other form of energy. And then I think the last point I will make here in terms of grounding this conversation in this global equation is we should never simplify any of these conversations we're having about energy source. I would have preferred this panel to have hydrogen, nuclear, renewable, gas, oil, all in the same panel and have a conversation. Because what we're doing every time we have these sessions, we bring all the hydrogen lovers in one room, have a conversation. No one here is against hydrogen. I hope not. That's why they're here. And then you put all the oil and gas guys in one room, and you put all the nuclear guys in one room. We need to bring everyone in a room because it's an equation, and everyone has its pie. The last point I will make, coming back to the title, it says fractures and polarization. Is the first two words in the theme of this conference. There's a fracturing in the energy ecosystem around the world because every energy source is trying to prove that they're the best thing for the world. The renewable guy says they're the best. The hydrogen said they're the best. The oil and gas guys say they're the best. Everyone thinks they are the best, when in fact we need a little bit of everything. We need some nuclear. We might need some hydrogen in Japan, for example. They might need it there. You might need some renewables, hydro in parts of Africa. There's no one size fits all. And I think that's the challenge we have now. How do we avoid polarizing the energy supply mix simply because it meets mine energy source or mine energy priority as opposed to yours? So if I love hydrogen, I should be able to also say good things about oil and gas, if it's true. If I love oil and gas, I should say good things about renewables. Last point, just remembering what happened in the U.S. when we had the blackout in Texas. When the blackout happened in Texas, everyone who was or who is against renewable blamed renewables. Okay? When the blackout happened in Spain, everyone who is against renewable blamed renewables. But when you look at the report, it turns out that it wasn't the renewables that caused the blackout in Texas or just the blackout in Spain. It was a combination of factors. So what we're doing as an industry is that everyone is trying to prove that their technology is a solution to the world's energy crisis, when in fact, it's a mixture, it's a combination. So maybe I didn't answer your question about petrostate and electrostate, but I don't really believe in that classification either. Because remember, even though you say China is more of an electrostate, China still uses significant amount of coal. Now, you could argue whether coal means it's more of an electrostate or a more carbon state. So I think these classifications, we should be very, very careful with that. So I will stop here and I'll be happy to take any questions.
Thank you very much. Someone applauding. Well, we at least have a suggestion for next year's panel. We're going to have to make this suggestion to the Amadeus Institute to have all the energy on the same panel, but that will be at least a 3-hour conversation. So I'll invite our co-panelists to reflect on what's been shared by all of you, and please feel free to speak.
Maybe I'd like to come back on the topic of the importance of the energy security, which I think is at the center of all what we've been discussing, combined with affordability. Sustainability, of course, is what everyone wants, but a combination of affordability and energy security is, I think, at the core of many of the decisions that will be taken in the future around the choice of the vector, of the energy vector. And in this respect, I think that a lot of what has been said is converging towards the message that, to some extent, hydrogen is probably an unavoidable solution to achieve that. Maybe not immediately, because you need to prove and to scale. But obviously, if you want to have your energy produced locally, or at least produced in nearby countries where you don't want to be too much dependent on the geopolitics of fossil fuels, probably hydrogen is a very attractive solution. Just by the fact that the number of countries that are today producing fossil fuels are counted in just a handful, whilst the countries which have very cheap renewable resources worldwide and land to do it, there are dozens of them. And probably this is one of the key factors of then driving a key change which will be green shoring. It's a word I actually heard last time I was in Saudi Arabia, which is interesting. Saudi Arabia is also actually pushing on this for their own energy security, interestingly. So if it can work for Saudi Arabia, probably it could work for countries which don't have the merit of having the oil produced on their land. But also, I think we mentioned before the topic of food security, which if you consider that green fertilizers or fertilizers today are very much dependent on gas, natural gas, and I think Europe in particular is very much dependent on Russian gas for its agriculture. In a context where you want to reduce that dependency, going towards a purchasing strategy around green ammonia and then green fertilizers, and thinking about it as how to dilute the premium of this green ammonia at the start that is probably a bit more expensive, but if you take it down the line of how much it costs if you're doing pasta or bread or beer with a green fertilizer at the start, actually the price difference is probably in cents. So I think this is probably things that you need to think into if you want to have this strategy around green premiums and green leads in the objective of reaching this green energy security topic.
Yeah, thank you very much. I would just totally agree in many places you're saying, but I just wanted to highlight it. To my opinion, it's not the question whether you love some sort of technology or you hate, but it's the determination that allows you to use some sort of technology. Everyone can love hydrogen, but we need to invest, we need to de-risk the whole system, we need to kickstart the whole industry. Otherwise, it's not the holy grail. whether you like some sort of technology or not, it's not just, you know, as a policymaker sitting in the room that I love this and I love that, but I see the geography, I see the infrastructure around us, I've seen what costs, you know, natural gas or LNG from the Netherlands. You would never get that cheap as the Dutch gets it in Hungary, because it's a landlocked country, 1,000 kilometers away. So there are so many determinations, and that's why where I totally agree with you that there is always a healthy energy mix, and hydrogen, green hydrogen, should have a place in these energy mixes in every individual countries. But a healthy energy mix can only exist if you take one country, or maybe not even the European Union as a bloc, but the smaller states, because we have different access, different options, we have different historical background, and I'm meaning the infrastructure itself. If you just see the pipelines in the eastern part of Europe, it always goes from east to west, and it barely goes from north to south. Which is a problem, because if you try to get some sort of energy resource, then you already determine yourself, and it takes a lot of money, of course, to invest. So I would say hydrogen is absolutely could be the missing puzzle, to coming back to that metaphor, but still we need to invest a lot. And I would say that the European Union is still not there yet. If we'd like to manage problems and not solving those. Americans like to solve those problems. Not even talking about the Chinese, who can rule basically and form a new industry within a decade, you know, just tear down the whole market. But what we see, what I personally see from the European side, that the Americans, for example, say that I give you $100 if you invest in a technology to be more competitive and step out to the global market. And the Europeans would say that I will fine you or punish you with €100 if you don't do it. And there is a €200 or dollars gap between the two. So there is a mentality that needs to be changed in order to select your energy sources you love, I would say.
Just because it's funny, I would like to add something. For me, Europe is saying, if you get subsidies from US to be more competitive, I put a fine on you. Because basically it's that. If you get the subsidies on the green electricity in US and you get your ammonia or hydrogen much cheaper, Europe does not accept it in the rate tree. So what an amazing thing. So they don't want low prices.
I like the idea that we should be optimistic and have the conviction of the will. And it's true that it is a truly American virtue to see everything positive, even.
I'm not sure. I think it's my virtue, not the American virtue.
So let's rebound on it. And a year ago, I was part of a delegation which was with President von der Leyen and the Prime Minister of Spain, who were visiting Nouakchott in Mauritania. And there was a very, very interesting discussion on, well, migrations was one side of it, and the other one was industrialization with hydrogen. And it was hopeful. It was hopeful. It was forceful. And Mrs. von der Leyen laid out a very bold plan saying we want to encourage steelmaking, by the way, in Mauritania. Why? Because Mauritania is a very big producer of iron ore. And there are plans in Ouadhibou, and not too far from here, I mean, a bit further south, to produce green steel. And there's a strong case to produce green ammonia as well, green fertilizers, food, etc. I mean, jumpstart. And I'm frustrated because nothing came out of that. It was just nice talk, nice conversation with the president of Mauritania, and there's nothing followed up. And that's a shame. At the same time, other countries like Italy have moved forward with the South H2 corridor, with plans to connect with Tunisia and Algeria. Well, Nothing's moving forward. And Brussels is talking, and not doing anything. And ultimately, and by the way, it's further south, it's not much better. In the end, it takes two to tango. But where is the plan, infrastructure plan, the pipeline plan? You know, we were bold enough in the 1970s to build pipelines between Soviet Union and going through Hungary and to Europe. And after all, it did work for 50 years. You know, because some people say it was a bad idea, but it did work for 50 years. Where is the pipeline? You know, Morocco has taken an initiative of a pipeline connecting Nigeria to Morocco. Fine. Well, where is the pipeline connecting Morocco to Spain, to France, to Germany, and possibly Mauritania and Senegal as well? I mean, by the way, it's an initiative which was taken by Mr. Benhadra with ONIM, etc. Where is this initiative? Where is the joint forces, the joint political? Where is the session on in this conference about an initiative that should bring these infrastructures connecting Africa and Europe? Where is the initiative that should bring investment here in Morocco and as well Mauritania? It was mentioned earlier with what is going on in Guinea. You want to produce, you know, who knows, you could produce at least sponge iron in Guinea, not just export the iron ore. You have today an immense opportunity to leverage green hydrogen, to industrialize, to create jobs, etc. And nothing is happening. And in the end, there needs to be a shock, because in the end, there is a business case for it. And money, by the way, money can do a lot of it. I'm talking private money. Private money could instill it. But it's true that as well, we need politicians, governments, to step forward and to say, let's have a plan. Let's give a future for future generations. Not just saying it's going to be dreadful because of this or that. Let's be hopeful. And hope needs to come with actual big projects. And right now, between Europe and Africa, aside from visits like the one I took part in, honestly, it's a waste of time. Let's stop visits, let's stop conferences, let's have big projects. And maybe, you know, you were talking about a call on the Institut Amadeus. Maybe you should have the appel de Tangier or something like that. We call, collectively, say, and we bring the governments and we shake them. You know, Ursula, yeah, wake up, Ursula, and the rest of us.
So, just a couple of quick observations. So, I like the point that was made regarding the need for policy, the need for investments. Let's remember, last year, when we were having this conversation, everyone was talking about the infrastructure, the Inflation Reduction Act. And why the Europeans like that? Why did a lot of countries like that? Because the US was putting a lot of money on the table to do this. And I remember asking the question, where is the European Inflation Reduction Act? And someone said, well, Europe doesn't have that kind of money. I disagree. Do you know who's one of the biggest investors in a lot of US projects? European investors. So why are European investors investing in the US and not in Europe? That's a question only the Europeans can answer. It's not that there's lack of money in Europe, but Europeans have to believe in Europe and invest in Europe, because the money that the US government is investing is the same money that the European investors could invest, or the European governments to invest. So the question is, if we do believe in Europe in hydrogen, well, let the French and the Germans and the Dutch and the Swedes and others put the money where their mouth is. If they need $500 billion to do it, then let them invest if they believe in hydrogen. But maybe they don't, which is why they don't want to make that investment, right? So I don't think it's so much so that the US is the only one that has the money. The Biden administration took a gamble. The Trump administration may not want to go down that pathway, but that doesn't stop the Europeans from making similar kinds of investments. I think at the end of the day, this conversation, and I agree with the colleague from Hungary, at the end of the day, the issue I see with the hydrogen sector, and I see this with many other sectors, what is the hydrogen story? What is the story you're telling the average citizen on the street? Because when I go to buy gasoline and I pump my gas, the first thing I think about is oil and gas. And what comes to my mind? Saudi Arabia, USA, maybe Norway. There's an emotional connection to pumping my gas and to these things. What is the emotional connection to hydrogen? We are still talking about hydrogen in almost an abstract way. The people listening to this conversation, the audience in this room, they need to feel an emotional connection to hydrogen. Today, they don't have it. So it's up to those who believe in hydrogen to tell the hydrogen story. And right now, the hydrogen story is something that is very expensive, something that's never going to happen, and all the other negative things. So I'm not a hydrogen storyteller. I mean, if you pay me, I will tell your story. But you need to tell your own story.
There is one storyteller. His name is Bertrand Piccard. He's launching in 2028 this plane around Europe, around the world, hydrogen plane. He did the same thing with Solar Impulse, with a solar plane, and he's a very charismatic, incredible person, and he's telling the hydrogen story, and we're working with him. He's a friend. And
what? Okay, let me ask you one question. How many people in the world fly a plane? Flying a plane is an elite lifestyle. So
good point.
became popular when we took solar panel to the villages around the world, and the average rural community in Africa could see a solar light on their house. Putting him in a plane is a good thing if you ride a plane. If you don't ride a plane, maybe you need to put up a hydrogen bicycle. Let him ride a hydrogen bicycle around. People have to feel this thing. We can't theorize it. It has to be felt by the poor person on the street.
I told Bertrand, you should team up with truck drivers that will follow your plane, because precisely the planes are things, but people can relate to truck drivers. So let's do something about truck drivers.
A lot Bertrand. I was here in Morocco when he brought his plane, 2015, I think, if I remember well. But I don't think it changed anything to have a solar plane or a hydrogen plane. It's maybe in terms of promoting that there is a way to accelerate the energy transition, yes, but it doesn't change the technology or our life. So if we had something to call for, I would ask, my hope or my dream is that Europe just realizes that they are pioneer. They were the pioneer in the green hydrogen, but they made a big mistake. They took it from the end. If we think about what could be the best regulation at the end for the green hydrogen, once it's competitive, it's the current European legislation. So they didn't think at all about the pathway to make it competitive, because they believe that it will be just like solar, PV, it will follow the same path. But I'm sure if we have put the current European legislation on PV, we will be still talking about PV being much more expensive than other sources. So if Europe relaxes its regulation more on the CO2, on the hourly matching, by 2040 or 2050, but giving a relax in order to let the markets really accelerate, invest, and bring down the cost, it could be much helpful. If Europe stays with its own regulation, I'm sure we will see regulations different from all the regions. And IMO started on that, because the IMO regulation is different from the EU Fuel Maritime. So we will start having different regulations, and it will add more complexity in the market, which will reduce the potential of trade and then the potential of acceleration of the competitiveness of the green hydrogen derivatives.
And maybe if I can ask to Mr. Jones' comment on the fact that US had put at that time, now it's dead, of course, for the IRA, much more money on the table than Europe. In fact, it's not a true fact. Because we had people from in our team, the public affairs, who did the comparison, and actually the figure is quite the same. The issue is that the way the European regulations are designed is much more complex. So I think the beauty of the US scheme was that it was extremely simple and efficient. $3 per kilo given a CO2 level, and you're getting there. Here in Europe, it's RED 3, it's refuel aviation, it's the CBAM. But if you pile up all those different regulations, you actually get to the same figure. So I think the topic is not that Europe believes in itself and is not investing in itself. I think the issue we have, and I think it was, is the complexity of and the understanding of it. And I mean, just to illustrate it, in High 24, we're a 40 people management company. We have 3 people dedicated to public affairs. So 10% of our staff is just looking at understanding the regulation. Of course, the regulation, when it's well designed, is a very powerful tool, and the decisions we're seeing happening are effectively happening. And the good thing is that because they're complex, it also means that it's difficult to unbundle, to take them away. So I would have a more nuanced approach to that. And maybe one last comment on the storytelling. I love the topic, and I think it's not the same storytelling in the global south and in the developed world, but probably in the developed world, I think the topic of the plane is rather, will people continue to take the plane if it's continuing to be so CO2 emitting? And many people now are doing flight shaming around that. So I think as an investor, as infrastructure investor into airports, the topic of decarbonizing aviation is super important. I think people understand it, that they will not be able to fly the plane anymore if they don't decarbonize it massively, and hydrogen is a very big enabler to it through the SAF. But then in the global south, maybe the question doesn't raise that much, and it's rather a question of pride. I think and I've been seeing it in Morocco here. I think when people, you tell them that they will be able to produce and become energy independent, I see stars in their eyes. I see a lot of pride. So I think that could be the storytelling for the global south, is that you become owner of your future. I think that matters a lot in the future world.
Sorry, probably one last comment. I will be short. Maybe another reflection on the storytelling. That's probably the way that would bring everybody to start acting together and not wait for the other ones, because we see like financing are waiting for the offtakes, and developers are waiting for the financing, and technology providers are waiting for the project to be developed, and everybody's waiting for everybody to do something. Expectations from technology providers to reduce prices to be more competitive, and expectations from financing institutions to bring a miracle, to just somehow say it's bankable and we can provide the money, but the offtakes would not commit for the long term of the duration of the projects. So maybe the storytelling is the one that could probably simplify things and bring everybody to the same table to really go on the same pace, and not have one waiting for the other to act for me to lag behind, and probably bring all the different pills to be swallowed together and move all together in the same pace and find the right solutions in the right mechanisms, but together to make it happen. Thank you.
Thank you. And just 3 really short remarks. It's really funny to me to hear Mr. Picard's name and any kind of continent or country I go to. He comes up quite often. I personally know him as well. The second is that what just came to my mind: if there is an electrostate and there is a petrostate, then the European Union must be a regulatory state and regulatory imperialist, basically, which is a normative superpower, we tend to say, which is not helping business in that sense as well. But let's not conclude in a really pessimistic way. 52 years ago, there was the first big oil crisis, and after that, the whole industry and the whole way Americans thought about the energy just shifted. President Nixon stated that the project independence, it's the first goal. Now it's turned to project dominance from the American side. I do believe that in the European Union, we chasing something project green dependence. What we bureaucratize the whole thing. But at that time in the 70s, it was also said, probably by Nixon, I'm not sure, that solar is the energy that God gave us. It was 50 years ago, and it took additional 30 or 40 years to reach the level we are now talking about. So let's not be, impatient. We still have a couple of decades, or maybe shorter, hopefully shorter, to reach the goal. What I assume all of us agree in this table. Of course, there are divergences and there are problems in that sense, but I think we are on the right track. Of course, it does not help if the European Union overregulates itself, basically, as from the Draghi report, that the one of the most outstanding parties that stopped regulating for 6 months. That's what he said, though, which is striking. Thank you.
Make a quick comment, and I don't want to defend Europe, but I will. You hear a lot about European regulation. I lived in Sweden for 20 years. I now live in the United States. And I can tell you that regulation is in the eye of the beholder. And this is what I mean by that. Every time someone says that Europe overregulate, I ask them, have you been and lived in the United States? It's not the same kind of regulation. It's very different. There's a new book out by Arturo Bries from the Lausanne School of Management. It's called Super Europe, in which he argues that Europe has an issue not because it's overregulated, because there's not enough capital. There's not a central capital market in Europe that's skilled to make the kinds of investment you would like to make, like in the US. The notion of Europe being overregulated, too much regulation. The only thing I have said to people, governments and others around the world, and I will say it to this group as well, go to the European regulators and tell them which regulation is bad. Because there has to be regulation. We cannot live in a society where there are no rules and regulations. But I think I would challenge us as an industry, instead of complaining that there's too much regulation, let's go and say these regulations are bad. But to just say that Europe is overregulated is saying, well, what should we do? So if we know as an industry, for hydrogen, for example, if there are specific regulatory principles that you think is wrong for hydrogen, argue for that with the European Union. But when you make the blanket statement that Europe is overregulated, you forget that even Japan is overregulated. Australia is overregulated. So regulation itself is not bad. Bad regulation is bad. And I think what I would hope our European friends would identify the specific regulation you think is bad. Because every time we make the argument that regulation is bad, we're sending the wrong message to other countries who may want to put in place rules and regulations on how the country should operate and say, oh, just get rid of all the regulators. I don't think that's what you're saying, but that's how it's perceived when you say European regulation is bad. Which one is bad?
I'll start with permitting. Permitting is a nightmare. I built my former company rebuilt the first solar park in France in 2008. It took 9 months to get a permit. Within 8 years, the process had moved from 9 months to 5 years. And now it's even worse. It's a total nightmare. Data centers, the most business-friendly part of Europe, in Denmark, it takes 5 years. 5 years of permitting. That's not good. Now, honestly, we live really in a regulatory inferno. And thanks for defending Europe, but not on this one.
But for me, maybe the right terms is to say it doesn't need to be ideologic. It needs to be pragmatic. And most of the regulations in Europe, I see them more dogmatic than pragmatic. The 45V, I cannot believe that Europe is excluding cheap ammonia or methanol from US because it just gets subsidies of 3 cents of dollar the kilowatt hour. As if I was a European, I would like tell them, what are you doing? I can pay less and it's green. it's the lowest CI score, but you don't accept that because it's subsidized by another country. So this kind of this is what we do not understand, and what we see is hindering the market when it comes to also the hourly matching, to the CO2 sources, and so on. Maybe one thing that is quite funny, and I find it also very funny. Europe says, if you put your carbon capture near a chemical facility, so you have the chimney, and you just sit 5 meters beside, and you put a carbon capture, and you capture the CO2 from the air. Europe says, I accept it. Your CO2 is good. It costs around $500 per ton of methanol. And then you tell Europe, but okay, but this facility is emitting the CO2. Why if I just put a pipe to the chimney and I take it directly from the chimney, it would cost me $50, not $500. Then Europe is saying, no, I don't accept it. So this kind of dogmatic approach is hindering the market, and this is what I was mentioning, that it needs to be more pragmatic and more intelligent to open the path for the growth of the ecosystem.
I'm a big fan of pragmatism, Mr. Zurali. I just want to ask this audience, do you know between Europe, America, and China, which is most regulated? Which of those 3 countries has the most regulation? Europe, America, or China? Okay, who's kicking Europe's butt? Is it Europe? Is it America? Or is it China? Okay, so regulation, regulation, why it is a problem, I agree with you, Terry, it is a problem. I think as an industry, we should not use regulation as the only barrier. I think we should be a little bit more innovative in terms of how to play the game. Because honestly, sometimes we haven't asked the question, who's benefiting from the regulation? It could be that the regulation is actually being put in place by other fuel sources that are perhaps more powerful than the Europeans. So while you may think that there's more regulation against hydrogen, maybe those regulations are being brought to bear by other sectors.
So we ended up coming to Morocco to complain to American. Let's
be solving the problem.
Sorry, let's start to work with our friends and neighbors in Morocco, because we basically know what to do from technological side, from investment, and maybe from the governments as well. And I think there is a good future for that, and we all can benefit from cooperation in that region as well. Not necessarily Hungary, we are a little bit far away, but if Morocco can help the western part of the European Union, that also helps to the eastern part of the continent as well, because it's easing up the whole energy infrastructure and costs. So I would, from my side, I would stop complaining.
And I am very sorry, but this will have to be our closing remarks because we ran out of time. But I just want to say this has been incredibly insightful, even for someone like me who's not very well versed into the topic. So thank you so much for this amazing panel with incredible insights. I want to thank you all, and also want to thank the Institute for organizing this session today. Thank you.